So the subject today is, again, Maimonides. We'll do a little Maimonides, some Talmud, and we're talking about, we're still in the laws of borrowers, but this is really not necessarily, it's a broader subject. It just overlaps with borrowers in some cases. And that's the case we're going to be talking about. So the starting point of the discussion is, and this is a sort of a general discussion, which appears in different Talmudic sources, and part of the problem is that it's a little bit confusing, the different Talmudic statements, and what we're going to try to do is try to make sense out of them. But the big question is as follows. Let's suppose in the language of the Talmud, I save myself through somebody else's money. Do I have to pay? So for example, the thieves come to my house and they say, okay, they want us robbed, and they say, give us $100 or we'll kill you. So I say, fine, sure, I'll give you $100. So I go to my closet, and in my closet, I have $200 bills. $100 bill that belongs to me. Another $100 bill that belongs to someone else. I'm the borrower, I'm the guardian. I'm guarding it. So now I think to myself, what do? If I give the thief my $100 bill, then I lose my money. If I give the thief the other person's $100 bill, maybe that's a better deal for me, because then the person's going to come and say, where's my money? I'm going to say, it's beyond my control. The thief showed up, held me up at gunpoint. There's nothing I could have done. So that's going to be the big question. The big question is going to be, the big discussion is, if I'm saving myself with somebody else's money. I'm giving away someone else's money, which I'm the guardian. It was entrusted to me, saving my own money, or at least in some cases my life. If I didn't have another $100, I'm giving you my money. I'm giving the thief your money, saving myself. Do I have to pay? And that's the big discussion that appears in different places. We're going to read what Maimonides says, and then we're going to see how this connects to the broader topic. But it's an interesting topic. The topic is, so on one hand, you can argue that the guardian, the shomer, the guardian, he's not responsible, because the guardian is not responsible for things that are out of his control. On the other hand, I myself gave the thief your $100. Maybe I should have to reimburse you. So this is what's at stake, and this is the beginning of the discussion. Like I said, we're going to read Maimonides' opinion or law, and then we'll see that Talmud seems to be saying something different. And then you have many post-Talmudic and commentaries on Maimonides that try to square the two. And like I said, this is a broad topic, a lot of fun. I'm looking forward. But in the meantime, if anybody wants to comment on the actual case, please do. And then we'll see what Maimonides says. Otherwise, we'll go straight to Maimonides. I'm just going to share the screen. Give me a minute. Okay, here we go. No, wrong chapter, chapter 5. Okay, so we're going to do chapter 5, section 2, in She'ela Pikadin, which is laws of borrowing and an entrusted item, borrowed entrusted item, which is a little larger. The following rules apply when a person entrusts money or valuable articles to a colleague. So let's say Vicky gave me $100. Thieves come and attack him, and he gives him the entrusted article before offering any of his other property to save himself. So if these show up, I say, okay, here's $100, get out of here. And they leave. Now, I didn't offer them my vessels or my money. I offered them the article that was entrusted to me. So that's the question. What do you do? So Maimonides does not do what the Talmud is going to do in a minute. We'll see why and why the cases differ. But Maimonides has a very interesting distinction. And he says it depends. Let's see what it depends on. If the person has the reputation of being wealthy, he is liable. The rationale is that we may presume that the thieves came because of the watchman. Thus, he is saving himself with money belonging to a colleague. And you cannot save yourself with money belonging to a colleague without reimbursing the colleague. Okay. If the watchman does not have the reputation of being wealthy, we presume that the thieves came only because of the entrusted article. Hence, the watchman is not liable. Similar laws apply in all analogous situations. So before we get into the questions on what Maimonides says, let's make sure we understand. Maimonides says like this. So I have Vicky's $100 bill. Thieves come to my house, they break in. I say, here's Vicky's 100, get out of town. They leave. Now you say, 1 second. Why do we think the thieves came to this house? Do they come to the house because they think I have money? If it's known that I have money, that I have some wealth, they're coming to me. They don't know that I have $100 from Vicky. They're coming to me because they want my money. Then I take Vicky's money and I give it to them to pacify them and get them out of town. Then I'm saving myself with somebody else's money, and I am liable. I would have to reimburse Vicky. In other words, even though usually if people come and steal, the thief, it's not the guardian's responsibility because the thief showed up. It's something beyond his control. But here, I gave it to the thief. I gave it to the thief, and the thief came for my money, and I'm using Vicky's money to save myself. So then I would be liable in that case. If, however, everyone knows I don't have any cash, thieves break into my house and say, give me your valuables. Everyone knows I don't have valuables. How do they know? Well, they see where I live. They see my house. They see there's nothing here. So why do they come? Oh, they come because they probably heard that someone gave me money. So then we assume they came for Vicky's money. And therefore, if I give them Vicky's money, I'm exempt. I don't have to reimburse Vicky. So that, in a minute, I'll ask you what you think about this, and then we'll see how it squares with the greater, what the Talmud says, which again is a little problematic, which leads to very interesting discussions. But I'll first tell you the joke. The joke is that there was a Jew. There was a Jewish character, a funny character. His name was Hershela. And there's all kinds of funny stories about him, but probably not true. One story, for example, is once upon a time he comes to a town, he knocks on somebody's door, and the guy's a big miser, doesn't want to give charity. So Hershela knocks on his door and he says, please give me money. Please give me food. So he says, no, we don't feed the poor here. So Hershela tells him, if you don't give me money, if you don't give me dinner, I'm going to do exactly what my father used to do. Oh, the guy got very afraid. Who knows what this guy's father used to do? So he invited him in. He gave him a lavish dinner. And after the dinner, he said, dude, just do me a favor. Tell me, I'm just curious. What would your father do? He says, well, my father would go to sleep hungry. So that's the one story about this guy, this probably fictional character. But the other story is that once upon a time, he's sleeping in bed and somebody breaks into his house and says, give me all your valuables. He says, you know what? Let's look together. Maybe we'll find something. We're not going to find something. Sometimes there's no money in this house. So why do the thieves come? Oh, because they know, they heard or they saw, or they know that somebody gave me a valuable to guard. Now they came for that item. They came for that item, and I gave them that item. The guardian is not responsible. So says Rambam. So says Maimonides. I'm just curious if you think it's a good solution or it's not a good solution, and then we'll try to put it into the perspective of the broader discussion.
My first instinct would be that you, in any case, you shouldn't be giving the money belonging to somebody else. And it's not because you used me as an example. It's just first instinct.
Okay, so your first instinct is, I have no business giving the thief your money. Okay, I'm not disagreeing with you, and I'll tell you in a minute, the Talmud says exactly what you say. And that's what Maimonides says is a little bit strange, and the rabbis and the commentaries try to figure it out. But let's think about this for a second. You're going to tell me I'm liable. You want me to pay you back the $100. I'm willing to have this discussion, and you're right in many cases, but I just want to say, think about this for a second. Under what doctrine? In other words, based on what are you making me pay you? Usually the law is that if I'm the guardian and I'm responsible to protect your object, and in this case, I'm an unpaid guardian. So I don't have to, I don't have a very high degree of liability, but I can't be negligent. But even if I were a paid guardian, the reality is if there's an onus is something that's classified completely out of my control. It's actually talking about an unpaid guardian. Let's see in a minute why. So it's talking about an unpaid guardian. I don't have to lose money to protect your item. We have something that's classified as something out of my control because a thief came and I can't really protect against an armed thief. So if I would do nothing, if I'm just passive, if I'm sitting at my dining room table studying Talmud and a thief breaks in with a weapon, tells me not to move, not to call the police, goes to the closet and takes the $100, it's clear that I don't have to pay because I'm not liable. I'm a guardian, unpaid guardian. I'm not liable for something that is out of my control, and I don't have to. And I don't have to give the thief my $100 to protect your $100 because I'm not a paid guardian. The problem here is, and you're right. You identify the point. The problem here is, I actively took the your $100 and gave it to the thief. So the
right, because you had two in the closet. You had two. It's not that you didn't have any money. You only had that $100. You gave it, and then you have to reimburse. You had $200 bills.
Right. But do I have to pay $100 to save your $100? I'm an unpaid guardian. I usually don't have to pay money. To protect your item. I'm an unpaid guardian. A paid guardian has to spend money to protect, but an unpaid guardian doesn't have to spend money to protect. So I don't have to. So let's go back to the scenario. I'm sitting at the table and a thief breaks into the house and he pulls out his gun and says, "Don't move." He says, "I'm taking the $100 that's sitting on the shelf." The envelope says Vicky on top of it. I don't have to say, one second. Before you take Vicky's money, in my basement, I have my money, take it from my envelope. I don't have to do that because I don't have to spend my money to save your money. I'm an unpaid guardian. But in that case, I wouldn't be liable because I did nothing. But you're right that in the case where I actively took with my own hands, I took your money and gave it to the thief. So Vicky says, and you're right, that it seems that the intuition should be that I should be liable. The Talmud says that I'm liable, that you're liable. And the doctrine is I saved myself with someone else's money. I actively took someone else's money to save myself. You're not allowed to do. I mean, you're allowed to do, but then you have to reimburse. So that's the Talmud. And I'm going to open the Talmud, we'll read a few stories in the Talmud. That's the Talmud. We'll read discussion of the Talmud. That's the Talmud. What's interesting here is Maimonides here comes up with a new distinction that we didn't read about in the Talmud. Here, Maimonides says it depends who they came for. Which, in other words, Maimonides is saying, some cases, even if I actively gave Vicky's money, I would not be liable. That's very surprising because that's not what the Talmud says. And that's what I'm saying, that there's post-Talmudic rabbis that have to explain what Maimonides says and why he says it. So there's all kinds of ways of squaring this, but let's at least start with the beginning. The beginning is the Talmud says that if I actively take someone else's money to save myself, I'm liable. Maimonides here says it depends. It depends. If I'm a wealthy person, so we presume the thieves came for me, then if I take Vicky's money and give it to the thief, then I'm liable. But if everyone knows I don't have a penny to my name, and they came to steal $100, then we presume they came for Vicky, and therefore I'm not liable. Why therefore? How does that change? Didn't I actively didn't I actively save myself with someone else's money? So that's the big question. Everybody wants to know this question. Everyone wants to know the answer to the question. So that's what we're going to discuss hopefully in a few minutes. But I want to just give a flavor of the Talmud. So let's do maybe a paragraph or two in the Talmud and see what happens. Apologize for the delay. Just trying to find it here on the internet. Oh, very good. Made it easier for me. Okay, story time. You waited so long, you get a story. The Gemara returns to the matter of one who showed another's field to thugs. Okay, that's basically similar conversation. Rav Huna bar Yehuda happened to come to the town of Bei Abioni. So the rabbi comes to town. Rav Huna bar Yehuda comes to town and came before Rava. So this is a town, I assume it's a town of Babylonia. Who sent him, did any legal incident come to you for judgment recently? Right? What happens when two rabbis meet? They want to know what anything new, any news. But what's any news? Not what the stock market is up to, but were there any legal matters that came up before you? Rav Huna bar Yehuda said to him, there was a case of a Jew whom Gentiles coerced, and as a result, he showed them property belonging to another, which the Gentiles later seized. He came to me for judgment, and I deemed him liable to compensate the owner for the loss. In other words, what happens is you have a Jew, Gentiles come to him and they want to steal his money. So what he does is he showed them somebody else's property. He says, oh, you could take that property. And the rabbi says, Rav Huna says, I made him pay. The Jew who showed the Gentiles a fellow Jew's property, he said he made him pay. Rava said to Rav Huna bar Yehuda, reverse your decision in the case and return the money to its owner, i.e. the thug. As it is taught in a Baraita, in the case of a Jew who Gentiles coerced, and as a result he showed them property belonging to another that the Gentiles later seized, he's exempt from reimbursing the owner of the property. But if he actively took the property and gave it to the Gentiles by his own hand, he is liable to compensate the owner. So here we have the story. What's the story? The story is that the rabbi, there's more stories on this page, but the first rabbi says, tells Rava, what did I do? I said, this Jew showed the other Gentiles, Gentiles of property of a fellow Jew. So I made him pay because he's saving himself with somebody else's money. That's what Rav Huna says. Rava, one of the most famous Talmudic scholars, Rava says no. Rava says you have to reverse the order. The Jew doesn't have to compensate this fellow Jew. Put the money, give the money back. In other words, reverse the order. Why reverse the order? Reverse the order because there's a difference between handing the thief or the Gentile or the thug, handing them somebody else's property or showing them someone else's property. That's the distinction that Rava makes. He says, if I show somebody else someone else's property, a thief comes to me with a gun, and he says, where is Vicky's, where's some property? And I say, well, in my shelf, there's an envelope that says, Vicky, there's money there. That's, I didn't actually show it to you. I didn't give it to them. I just showed it to them. Showing to them, Rava says, I'm not liable if I showed it to them. But if I actually hand it to them, literally the Talmud says, Nasa v'nasan, he lifted up and handed it to them, then I am liable. That's what Rava says. That's Rava's distinction. And in that case that came before Rav Huna, the guy never handed it to the Gentiles, he just showed it to them. That is that Talmudic story. Rabbah, another Talmudic sage, he amends and he says something. He doesn't disagree, he just adds a detail. He says, the Gemara adds it, Rabbah says, if he showed the Gentiles the property on his own volition, it is as though he actively took the property and gave it to the Gentiles by his own hands, and he is liable to compensate the owner. In other words, what does Rabbah say? Rabbah says, if they come to you and they say, force you to give them money, and you show them someone else's property, you're not liable because you didn't give it to them. You only showed it to them. But if you went to them and you said, by the way, I know you're looking for some cash. I want you to be my friend. So by the way, my neighbor has cash in the basement. Nobody ever asked. They didn't force you to disclose the information. You went to them and spoke to them of your own volition. Then the fact that you showed them is just like you handed it to them. That's the story, and that's the first story on this page of the Talmud, Baba Kama, chapter 117. We have another little story here that also refines it. We'll get to that in a second. So let's read the next story. The Gemara recounts another incident. There was a certain man that Gentiles had coerced, and so he showed them the wine of Rav Mari, son of Rabbi Pinchas, son of Rav Chisda. And the Gentiles said to him, "Carry the wine and bring it to us," complying with the Gentiles. He carried and brought it to them. The case came before Rav Ashi, and he exempted the man from compensating Rav Mari for the wine. It's a very interesting case. So what happened here? The Gentiles come to this guy, and they say, "Give us some possessions. Give us some goods." So he shows them the wine of Rav Mari. He shows them the wine. Based on the previous story, if you show someone the wine, you're exempt. But if you actively participate in the transfer, you have to pay. So in this case, Rav Mari shows them the wine, but they don't want to work hard. So they tell the Gentiles coerce him to take the wine of Rav Mari and bring it to wherever they want him to bring it. So now, first he showed it to them, but once he showed it to them, they actually forced him, and he was actually active. He actually carried the wine from the house of Rav Mari to the place where those Gentiles wanted him to bring it. Okay, so now they came before Rav Ashi, and do I have to pay? Does this guy have to pay for the wine that he not only showed the Gentiles where it is, but he actually schlepped it from the guy's house, from the Jew's house, from Rav Mari's house to the Gentiles? Rav Ashi said, a little bit surprisingly, Rav Ashi said he does not have to pay. Doesn't have to pay. So the rabbis told Rav Ashi, how could you say he doesn't have to pay? Didn't you just tell me, didn't Rava just say that if you actively handed it to the Gentile, you're liable? So in this case, yes, he showed it to him first, but after he showed it to him, he actually carried the wine of Rav Mari to the Gentile. So why is he not liable? So that's what the rabbis in the synagogue, they jump up, they sit in the study hall and they say, what's going on here? The rabbi said to Rav Ashi, but isn't it taught in a Baraita, if he took the property and manually transferred it to the Gentiles, he is liable to compensate the owner? So in this case, he himself transferred it. Rav Ashi said to them, that statement applies only in a case where the Jew did not bring the Gentiles to the property at the outset. But if he brought the Gentiles to the property at the outset, it is as though he already burnt it, as the Gentiles then had access to the property. Since the damage inflicted by the Jew was committed by merely showing the wine to the Gentiles, he's exempt from payment, even though he later actively carried the wine with his hands. So what Rav Ashi says is something very interesting. Rav Ashi says, what I ruled is consistent with Rava. What did Rava say? Rava said that if you show it to the Gentiles, you're not liable, but if you carry it to them, you are liable. If you hand it to them, you're liable. Says Rav Ashi, what happened in this case? The Jew showed the Gentiles Rav Mari's wine. They were in the presence of Rav Mari's wine. At that point, it's gone. It's like it was stolen. It's like it's destroyed. It's like it was burnt up already. The original owner, Rav Mari, is never going to see the wine again. Now, is the Jew liable for showing the Gentiles the wine? No, they forced him to show he's not liable. Once it's burnt up, now you're asking him to carry something that's already burnt up. You're not liable. That's what Rav Ashi's reasoning was. So adding another layer. And we have one more detail here, one more case, and one more question and distinction, and then we'll sum everything up, and then we'll see if we can make any sense of this. Talmud continues. Rabbi Abba raised an objection to the opinion of Rav Ashi from a Baraita. Baraita is a teaching of the Tanoim, a teaching of the sages of the Mishnah, but it was not included in the Mishnah. Says the Baraita as follows. The Baraita says, in a case where ruffian, ana, someone who forces people to do, he uses force to do things that are immoral. So a ruffian said to the Jew, pass me this bundle of grain or this cluster of grapes, and the Jew passed it to him. The Jew is liable to pay the owner of the grain or the grapes. Since the ruffian was already present, it is evident from the Baraita that one who hands over another's property to a third party is liable despite the fact that the latter already had access to it. In other words, what are you telling me? Rabbi Abba asks Rav Ashi, what are you telling me a story that once the Gentiles see it, it's like it's gone, and once they saw it, if you carry it to them, you're not liable? No, there's a Baraita that says the opposite. The Baraita says that if the Gentile tells you to hand them the grain or the cluster of grapes, and you do, you're liable because you handed it to them. So what does Rav Ashi answer? Rav Ashi is a clever guy. You can get out of this problem, not a big deal. He says as follows: with what are we dealing here? We are dealing with a case where the Jew and the ruffian were standing on two different sides of the river, so that the ruffian did not have access to the item when the Jew passed it to him. Rav Ashi says there's a very big difference between the two cases. In my case, the Gentiles told the Jew to carry the wine, but if he wouldn't, they would carry the wine themselves. In the case of the Baraita, says Rav Ashi, the Gentile and the Jew on two sides of the river. The Gentile cannot reach the wine or cannot reach the grain. He needs the Jew to carry it to him. In that case, if the Jew carries it to him, the Jew is liable. And the Gemara points out that the language of the Baraita is also precise according to this explanation, as it teaches the ruling using the term pass. He says, pass me the grain. Pass me the, what else was it? The grapes. So hoshit, to pass. In English, it doesn't really work, but in Hebrew, the pass, which indicates that a ruffian could not have reached the item himself, and he did not teach using the term give, which would indicate that the ruffian was standing next to the other individual. The Gemara concludes, learn from the language of the Baraita that Rav Ashi's interpretation is correct. Okay, fine. Let's stop here. Let's make a summary of what the Talmud says. Let's figure out if we like it or not. Then we'll figure out if Maimonides is consistent with the Talmud. And if he's not, we have to also understand Maimonides. Okay, so we have a lot of details here. So let's start with the Talmud. The Talmud seems to be saying as follows. The Talmud is making a few distinctions. The Talmud says, right, what does the Talmud say? Okay, the Talmud says if you hand the money to the Gentiles, to the anas, to the thug, you're saving yourself with someone else's money. If you handed it to them, you're liable. If you showed it to them, you're not liable. That's what the Talmud says. Then there's another distinction also. Once you show it to them, if you hand it to them, does that make a difference? Okay. But the general rule is, the general takeaway is, let's forget about showing them. Let's say handing it to them. If I hand it to them, if I hand someone else's money to them, I am liable. That's what the Talmud says. That's the takeaway. So someone comes up to me with a gun and he says, give me money. I say, go to my basement. I have someone else's money. They say, I don't want to hear. Bring me the money. Then I go to the basement and I bring Vicky's money. I'm liable to pay. That's what the Talmud says. Maimonides comes up with the problem is that Maimonides comes up with a new distinction. Maimonides says, well, it depends. It depends if they came. If they think that I have money, then I would be liable for giving Vicky's money. But if they didn't come for my money, they came for Vicky's money because they know that I don't have any money, then if I give it to Vicky, if I give Vicky's money to them, I'm not liable. That Maimonides that we just read, where does it come from? It doesn't say it in the Talmud. So all the early commentators and later commentators are discussing this issue. But just to summarize, again, the Talmudic law, if someone forces me back at gunpoint, if I hand them your money, I am liable. Maimonides says, if I'm the guardian and they came to my house, but obviously they didn't, if it's a case where they did not come to my house, they did not come to my house for my money because they know I have no money. Then if I hand them Vicky's money, I'm not liable. We have to figure out what Maimonides says, but that's the question. That's the question. So it took us about 35 minutes to get to the question. Now hopefully we'll have a few minutes for the discussion, and maybe a few minutes for a few answers. But that's the discussion so far.
It seems like everything happens behind closed doors, and Maimonides kind of wants to shed the light on the story because
okay.
Basically common knowledge. Like
so I want to say something about that. we're not talking about a case that there's a dispute of the facts, right? I'm an honest guy. I'm happy to say what I did, right? In the cases of the Talmud, the guy shows up and he said, first I show them, Rav Murray's, first the guy says, first I showed him Rav Murray's wine, and then I schlepped it to the Gentiles. Either he was honest or there were witnesses. The facts are not in dispute. What we're discussing is the liability, legal question. I'm operating under coercion. How much am I responsible for my actions when I'm being forced? And now and we're making a moral distinction between actively engaged in the transfer, then I would be, according to the Talmud, then I'm always liable, rather showing where I'm more indirect. And if I'm indirect, plus you have the element of coercion, then the Talmud says you're not liable. In other words, our question is not so much, we have questions of how do you prove? How do you determine who's lying and who's not lying? That's a separate discussion. Where is there witnesses? Is there witnesses? Is there what would logic dictate? Does it make sense that he's lying? Does it make sense that he's not lying? That's not what we're discussing here. We're discussing here all the facts are not in dispute. The question is moral liability, and the question is how. And we have two issues here. We have one issue is if I operate under coercion, how responsible I am, and number two is how indirect is indirect. In other words, if I just show you something, tell you about something, if I tell you that my friend has money in their basement and you broke in and stole, how responsible am I? So these are the issues, and of course they overlap, and they're going to overlap with Maimonides, and Maimonides himself is going to add a new idea. This is a new idea. Maimonides almost never has his own laws. I mean, he doesn't classify this as his own law. He just says, oh, the Talmud is not talking about this law, but it actually becomes very interesting. How do you answer? Where do Maimonides pull his distinction out of the hat? Which is, did the people come for the guardian's money? Is it well known that the guardian has money, or is it well known that the guardian has no money? And obviously they came for the money of the, what's her name? The money of the that was entrusted, Vicky's money. Okay, so there's a lot of many ways to answer this question. I'm going to give you the one I like the best. And if you want to stay for more, we'll stay for more. But I'll give you the one I like the best. So the one I like the best goes something like this. But to understand it, you have to preface another Talmudic law. And then you'll know Maimonides didn't really make it up out of the blue. It has a biblical source. So I asked you a question. We're riding on a ship. And there's a storm in the ship, and everybody senses that this is dangerous, and we have to take off some load off the ship. A terrible story, but this is what happened. You happen to have a donkey on the ship because it's like a what do they call those? A ferry. Sometimes you have a boat that they let the cars on. So they let the donkeys on the ferry. So I pick up your donkey and I throw your donkey overboard because he's taking up too much weight. And thank God we survive. Unfortunately, the donkey does not. Now you take me to court. You want to bill me because I killed your donkey. I said, what are you talking about? I saved my life. Your donkey was really trying to kill us. But here I actively destroyed your money. So I almost sacrificed your money to save myself. Let's assume you're not on the boat. Let's assume you are, maybe you're on the boat, not on the boat, doesn't really matter. Let's leave that alone for a second. Now, based on everything I would know in this Talmud, it sounds like I would have to pay because I actively picked up the donkey and threw the donkey overboard. I would have to pay. If you don't like the donkey, if the scene bothers you, talk about, so you had a suitcase full of, I don't know, precious stones. Doesn't really matter what. The point is I offloaded some weight. You had heavy metals. I don't know, you had uranium. I don't know what you had. You had something that was very heavy in your suitcase. I throw it overboard. And I actively did it. So based on everything I knew, just learning this page of Talmud, Baba Kama 117a, I would say I have to pay. Yes, I saved myself with someone else because I actively saved myself with someone else's money. However, the Talmud over there says no. Talmud over there says that I don't have to pay. Why? Because there's another Talmudic doctrine. The other Talmudic doctrine is called rodef, pursuer. If you're chasing me to kill me, I can kill you in self-defense. Now, even not because you're malicious, even if you don't really know. So let's say, even if you don't really know, if you're pursuing me to kill me, I can kill you. or I can destroy you. Says the Talmud, the donkey is pursuing to kill me. The donkey is directly causing damage to me because he's on the ship and creating waves. You are a fatal danger for me. So if I destroy you, if I destroy the donkey, I'm not liable because you are a rodef, you are a pursuer. That's that case, which is fascinating to discuss. But let's accept this for a second. Let's come back to our case. Says Maimonides, yes, usually if I give the money to the Gentile, I am liable. So some people explain that Maimonides says, what happens if I'm the guardian? Vicky's money is in my basement. Everybody knows I'm poor. Everybody knows I have no money. The only reason why the thief came here is because the thief wants Vicky's money. Vicky's money is actively putting me in danger. As opposed to the other case where the thieves are just looking for wine, so they grab the first Jew on the block and they say, where is there wine in this base and this block? And I show them my neighbors. That's fine. That neighbor's wine is not actively putting me in danger. It's not in my possession. Here, what brought the thief to my house, what brought the thief to my premises is Vicky's $100 sitting in the envelope. That $100 is pursuing me. That $100 is putting me in danger. Okay, I could sacrifice it. That's one way of reading Maimonides. There are many, many other interpretations because Maimonides seemingly says something that the Talmud doesn't say. He makes this new distinction of whether it's known that I'm wealthy or it's known that I'm poor. Where did he get this from? So according to this interpretation, which was my favorite, that Maimonides would tell you, look, you can't just look at Baba Kama 117. You have to look at all the cases. And in the case where the object is the pursuer, I would be liable. I could sacrifice it because it's killing me. So Vicky's $100 is the donkey that's killing me. Give it away.
That's why I like the Herschel story, because he offered the thief to find it themselves.
Because he had nothing. Because he had nothing in the house. He was a poor person. That was part of all his jokes about poor people. Before we go, I'll tell you another Herschel joke.
Right. But if you just extend it to that example instead of handing them the money, he would say, I don't know, I forgot, I don't know, there's nothing, and then they will have.
Look, you can't, but Vicky, you can't blame someone there at gunpoint. You can't expect them to. You can't expect expect the person to try to lie and hide because maybe if they'll find the money, they'll kill me. A person has allowed to protect themselves. And nobody says you shouldn't give a thief the money. The only question is, am I liable to pay afterward? Or do I have to reimburse? And the answer is, well, you have to reimburse because the general law is, the Talmud says, if you actively save yourself with someone else's money, you have to pay them. You have to repay it. That was the case, unless I only showed, which is okay. I showed, I didn't do. That's another discussion. But if I actively go and take the $100 and give it to the thief, I have to pay generally. If I'm not a guardian, right? Imagine I'm walking down the street and the thief shows up to me and he says, puts a gun to my head and says, give me $100. I say, I don't have. Just find from someone else in the block. So I walk into your house, take the money, give it to the thief. There's no question I'm liable. But if it's in my house and I'm Herschel, everyone knows I don't have a dime to my name. So why did the thief come to Herschel's house? You don't do that. You don't go to Herschel's house. Herschel has no money. But they came to Herschel's house because it got out, the word got out that Vicky is going on vacation to Florida and asked Herschel to guard his $100. Says Herschel, I'm giving the $100. I don't have to pay. This $100 is pursuing me. This is killing me. This is putting me in danger. This is like the donkey on my ship that I'm allowed to throw overboard. Now, Maimonides didn't say this. There's other ways of reading Maimonides. But that's one interpretation.
And also the other interpretation will be the active choice. If they come to the house of the person who already has money, and he chooses to say or to give something that belongs to him, like in your initial example.
If I actively give, I would be liable. If I actively give, I would be liable. Oh, you're saying, one second, you're right. That's a good point. It's a good point. You're saying, oh yeah. So because then you can't classify Vicky's money as the pursuer, because Vicky's money is not the pursuer any more than my money is the pursuer.
Right.
So the pursuer argument is out. So the pursuer argument is out. So we go back to the standard case of it depends that if you give money, if you save yourself with someone else's money, you're liable to pay.
And that's another explanation of the case of Maimonides, where you come to somebody wealthy who has a choice whether to give somebody else's money
that clause was never difficult. That part we always understood. The fact that he says that if I have money and they come to me and I give Vicky's money, I'm liable. That's the standard case. That's the case because I saved myself with someone else's money. What was surprising is Maimonides came up with this new distinction that we didn't find in the Talmud. Maimonides says if it's known that I don't have money, and we could assume they only came for Vicky's money, then if I give Vicky's money, I'm not liable. Where do you get that from? Because the rule is that if I save myself with someone else's money, I should have to pay. So that's why this commentary says, well, we have to classify the money as the pursuer, and then I can give it away, and then I'm not liable.
So that's another explanation of my mind.
Yeah.
To the one you gave, which I like.
There are other interpretations as well, and that is ironically, okay, there's other interpretations. You want one more interpretation? I'll give one more interpretation. That ironically, the guardian is less liable. In other words, in the standard case, if I wasn't a guardian, someone come up to me, puts a gun to my head and says, I know you have no money because you're Mr. Herschel, you have no money. Find $100 on my block. Find $100 and give it to me. In that case, if I go to someone else's house and I give them $100, I would be liable. Now, usually we think that a guardian is more liable than a regular person. But in this case, the guardian is less liable than a regular person. How come? How so? So some people would say, so I have no money and I agree to be the guardian. Some people would say, usually the guardian is more responsible, but in this case, less responsible. Why? Because the guardian legally stands in the shoes of the owner. That's his status. When I'm the guardian, I'm responsible to do what the owner would do. So the commentary says like this, he says, if the owner had no money and someone comes into the owner's house and will give 100, and somebody would come to him at gunpoint and say, give me the money. Would the owner give the thief the money? Of course. The guardian stands in the feet of the owner, does not have to do any more than the owner. He agreed to guard in the manner that the owner would guard. So that's an exemption for a guardian. That does not apply if I'm not a guardian, which is upside down, because usually we think of a guardian having more liability than a stranger, but in this case, the guardian has less liability than the stranger. The stranger would show somebody Vicky's money, the stranger would be liable. The guardian who shows Vicky's money, who hands over Vicky's money, would not be liable according to this interpretation, according to this theory. May or may not be right, may or may not be universal, but that's a theory. Again, it's another way of thinking about this process and thinking about how did Maimonides get his law, make a distinction that does not appear in the Talmud based on what doctrine. So either it's because the Maimonides would classify, if I'm poor and I have Vicky's money in my house, I can give it away because I'm classified as because it will classify the money as the pursuer, as the donkey trying to drown me, and I can destroy that money. Or the other distinction would be that usually I'm never allowed to break into someone else's house and give away their money. I'm never allowed to do it. I can break into someone's house, give the money to the thief. I would have to reimburse them if I'm a stranger. But ironically, if I'm a guardian, and again, it's not that I had money and they had money. There was no money in the house. It's just me. It's just Vicky's money. And I put myself in Vicky's shoes and I say, I'm the guardian. I do not have to do an inch more than the owner would do. And if the owner would give it away, the guardian can give it away. But to me, that's fascinating because this is the only case that I can think of where the guardian is actually less liable than the stranger. Usually a guardian means you assume more liability. In this case, no, not more. I assume to be in the shoes of the owner. The stranger cannot make this argument because he has no relationship with the owner. You're just a stranger. You can't break into someone else's house and take the money to give the thief. I mean, you could, but they have to reimburse. But the guardian, who usually has more liability, but he has a relationship with the owner, and he says, "My job, I do exactly what the owner would do." And if we could assume the owner would give the money, I'm allowed to give the money. So that's another way of doing it. There are many other ways. We could sit here. We could sit all afternoon. That's, I guess, that's what they're doing in yeshiva as we speak. But there's a lot more to do. But it's just an interesting way you have the Maimonides, and people read it and say, "Boom! Where did this come from? I didn't see that in the Talmud on page 117. Okay, so they spend time trying to make the distinction between what Maimonides says and what the Talmud says. And according at least to the first interpretation, Maimonides didn't make it up. He just used another Talmudic principle and applied it to this specific case. So this was been a lot of fun for me, honestly. I was very excited since last night to talk about this. So thank you for joining. Sorry for the delay, and hopefully we'll meet in good health for many, many more opportunities to study the Holy Torah. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Wonderful day.